Hello, it's Sunday, June the 7th, and I'm here in the church building. It's been 12 weeks now since we've been able to gather together as church, and we're all feeling the cost. And that's really understandable because we're a family that should be together, and yet we are apart, and it's not that we wish to be apart. I, for one, am really missing preaching to you in person. Not being able to see your faces, not being able to see your reaction as I go through has been hard. Not singing together has made a real difference, and not chatting to one another afterwards informally. These are things that we miss, and it's right that we miss these things. It has been a cost for us being apart for these 12 weeks. The government has started to ease the lockdown, and as a church we need to think through what that looks like for us. It's fair to say that amongst us there'll be very different opinions about what should be done and when and how. Some of you will be really confident and be saying, yes, let's get on with it, let's get going, let's gather back together again and may everything be back to normal. Others of us will be far more cautious, be saying, no, slow down, take it steady, we're not through the crisis just yet. Well, whether you would say you're more cautious or whether you're more confident, I think both views are very much understandable at the moment. But the best practice for us as a church is that we need to listen to what the government says and submit to what they say. We need to listen and submit to the government. But whilst doing that, we also need to express real love and care for one another who are part of the church. We need to remember that God gives government for our good. During the lockdown, the government have been not anti-Christian, they've been anti-gatherings, because gatherings are the places where this virus spread most easily. And so it's legitimate for a government within a health crisis to limit gatherings. They're limiting gatherings across the board. They're not focusing on churches as just one case. They're focusing on all gatherings. And it's right that the government have been doing this. Also, the government have the best advice. They've got scientific advisors and health experts who are giving them advice that they are listening to. We don't have that kind of advice. We're quite ignorant when it comes to making big decisions. So we must listen to those that God has put over us, and we must submit to what they say. The likelihood is that it's not until early July that churches will be able to gather together in any particular way. At first, it's going to be churches will be opened for individuals for private prayer. And I don't think that's church in any real sense. It's going to be some time into July before we can gather together in any particular way. But even when we are able to gather together, even when it is permitted, we need to bear in mind two big things in particular. There'll be lots of details that we'll need to work on, but two things in particular are that we will need to maintain social distance. As we gather together, we'll need to maintain social distance. And secondly, we won't be able to sing together. Singing is one of the ways where the virus spreads most easily. So I think these two things will be a great cost to us as a church, and we'll feel their impact. Gathering together as a church and staying 2 meters apart will have really big implications on how the building works and how we interact with one another. Not singing together, we're going to feel that so deeply, and we must recognise that. I mean, even if the government lessened the social distancing, so it's 1.5 meters instead of 2, that still has complications. But the likelihood is social distancing and no singing are going to remain as what we should be doing for the foreseeable future once we are able to meet together. Church will not be the same. We need to know that in advance. And I need to be clear, going against the government on these matters is something that we will not do as a church. We will not go against the guidelines of the government. We will need to follow, we need to adhere to them, and we need to obey them. But as we move ahead, we also need to think about, well, ourselves, perhaps from two different perspectives. We need to think of ourselves as individuals, but we also need to think of ourselves as a family, as a gathering, as a church, as a corporate body. We need to think about being individuals and being together at church. As individuals within church, we will come to our different views on how cautious we should be, how confident we should be, whether we should stay at home more often or whether we should go out and be out and about more often. And even when we come to a situation where we are able to gather publicly, there'll be some of us who will still want to remain at home. Whether you're still vulnerable or whether you're anxious, you will want to stay at home and not join in with the public meetings of the church. There'll be other people who are so confident you just want to get back into things straight away. And I want to say that as an individual, whether you decide to stay at home or not, that is a legitimate decision that you can make. It is okay to stay at home when you feel anxious or if you feel vulnerable to catching the disease. But whatever happens with our individual practice, we need to know that as a church, we have a responsibility to love one another and to be generous to one another. We all come to different views on these matters, and it'll be easy to look down on other people who take a different view, to think they're not confident enough or not strong enough or not bold enough with their views. Whether you're cautious or whether you're confident, you will be tempted to look down and think ill of those who've taken a different view. But we also need to think about the most vulnerable amongst us. How can we as a church love and care for those who are most vulnerable? And that means setting aside some of our own interests, setting aside what we want to do and what we might think is best. I've been reminded recently from Paul's letter to the Philippians about how important it is for churches to be united together. I want to close by reading some verses from Philippians. This is Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Paul writes, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you looking to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset of Christ Jesus." We need the mindset of Christ Jesus in the coming months. The mindset of Jesus was he sacrificed his own good for the sake of others and their well-being. We need to follow him in that example, sacrifice our own interests, our own rights, to love and serve others in our midst. I'd love to hear from you about what you think the way forward should be, how quickly we should ease the lockdown, but also how cautious you might be feeling. Whatever we decide as a church, whatever decision is made, some will think it's too quick, some will think it's not far enough, but we need to have love and grace and compassion for one another. Lifting the lockdown is going to be a challenge. Let's focus on the lockdown lifting with the mind of Christ, with a desire to love one another, especially when they come to views which are different from ourselves. And even in this season, in the coming months, may we as a church grow in our love for Christ and our love for one another through the difficult circumstances that may come ahead. Well, thank you very much for listening. I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to seeing you in person when that is possible.